So I've been using this Alesis Nitro Mesh eDrum kit for a while. I think that's what it's called. Um, and I use it to trigger samples in Superior Drummer. So I don't use any of the kits in the brain of this thing. I just send MIDI signals into my DAW where I'm running Superior Drummer as a VST and trigger samples that way. I have worry, a nagging worry that there is latency, an unacceptable amount or an inconsistent amount, maybe, of latency in that MIDI over USB chain. MIDI over USB into my motherboard, which is triggering audio samples that are loaded into memory. Um, I think so. I haven't been super happy with the results I've been getting, and I think there's only two possible explanations. First, the most likely explanation is that I suck at drumming. I'm pretty sure that's actually the explanation here. Second is that there is some kind of unacceptable latency or strange inconsistent latency when I am sending MIDI through that chain to trigger samples. So, to ease my worried mind, I am going to test this once and for all. I thought I'd share it because maybe you have the same worry. And this is a very simple test. So, like, I am going to I'm going to do what I usually do, use the MIDI to record the MIDI that I'm using to trigger the samples, and that'll just be recorded on my track in Reaper as MIDI. And then I'm going to record another track, which is the audio coming from this large diaphragm condenser mic. And this is a pretty sensitive microphone. It's close to the kit. I'll crank the preamp sufficiently so that we will clearly be able to see the peaks on the audio. So there'll be like an audio signal that we can compare from the mic with the MIDI, and we'll ensure that the transients from the actual audio signal of me smacking the pads, we'll ensure that those line up precisely with what my DAW records as the MIDI input. And we'll see if I am just a terrible drummer or if there is some weirdness going on in my MIDI recording chain. So I'll do that, and I'll meet you in Reaper.
Okay, so here we are in Reaper. I captured the mic feed here, so you can see the audio from just the audio of smacking the pads, and then down here, under drums MIDI, this is the captured MIDI from what I just recorded. I actually so I played this back after I recorded it, and I could before I muted the mic feed, I was playing the mic feed with the drum MIDI or with the triggered samples, right? This MIDI's triggering samples. And I could hear it. I could hear a delay. um, there was definitely latency when playing them. So that made me think, hang on, maybe there's just latency in playing this MIDI for when the when everything's playing with all the plugins and everything in this project. Maybe there's latency just triggering the samples. So I rendered this drum kit to audio here. So now we can compare the the mic feed of the smacks of the rubber pads, well, mesh in some cases, and we can compare that to the MIDI that got recorded into my DAW. We can see if there's any discrepancies there between these transients and the start of these captured MIDI notes. And then we can also see if there's any discrepancy between these transients and these transients here of the actual audio that will get rendered once you um, render your MIDI to your drum MIDI to audio. Just a brief note, so I I actually recorded this into a project that I'm working on. It's a small project right now, but there are some plugins on other tracks that were active when recording. So this is the exact state of everything. It's the same as when I recorded, except for like I muted this and I rendered this, you know. But so you can see I disabled any drum bus plugins. I also disabled master bus plugins. So there was no discernible latency when I was playing the drums. At least the latency was under the threshold that I can tell. So let's just look here. First, let's not even consider the rendered audio for now. Let's just collapse that. Let's look at the mic feed versus the drum MIDI. Like I said before, I could hear a difference. I could hear the latency. So I'll put this right at the start of when the microphone starts capturing anything. Yeah, you can already that's a significant amount of latency. Let's see if it. Okay, so how do I measure? How can I measure a selection in Reaper? What if okay, I want to measure. I want to see if I can measure this amount of latency here. So we'll go from the start of there. We still want to zoom in here. I say, okay, so we'll need to just line these up one by one. Okay, so now we're down to looking at actual samples. That's a lot of samples. This is worse. This is significantly worse than I thought it would be. Okay, so let's say about right here. Start end length is 0.02. What's that, 2 milliseconds? No. I wonder, I'm gonna Google real quick if I can see what this is. Okay, so yeah, so it turns out if you come down here and right click on the selection stats, if you right click it, you can set it to seconds. So we can see here that the difference between when the mic picked it up and when the MIDI was recorded is 7 milliseconds. I don't like that. We're talking about drums here, you know. At least maybe if it's consistent, I can write some script that will nudge all MIDI notes earlier by 7 seconds. So let's analyze. Why is there no transient here? Why did the mic pick nothing up for this? What is? It's just it's just an extremely soft hi-hat hit, I guess. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So apparently I had some really soft hi-hats which the mic didn't pick up. I'm a little bit surprised by that. I could slam this, but I'm gonna leave it raw for now. So all we need, so we have 7 milliseconds. Let's analyze this one now. Look at this. Is this even more? Oh, interesting. Okay, so when you're down at this scale, the selection does not snap. Okay, so here's the first sample where we are recording audio. And here, okay, how much is this? And yep. So it's very worrisome. So now the latency for this hit was 4 milliseconds. Now, so there's already some inconsistency. We have 7 milliseconds, 4 milliseconds. Let's try this guy. Which is 6 milliseconds. And let's just, okay, so what do we have? 7, 4, 6, let's write this down. Okay, let's take 2 more samples later on in the recording. So about, oops, oh, whatever. Okay, so there, 2 here. 5 milliseconds. Okay, so we're clustering at least. So far, the spread is only 3 milliseconds, which is, promising. I'm worried that this is dependent on what's going on in your project. So even if we take a lot of samples and average them, I'm worried that that average won't be useful across projects or as your project evolves if you need to retake some drums and you have different plugins, a different number of plugins active in your project. I'm worried that this latency is not consistent. I guess that would require further experimentation, but let's just continue on with this for now. Keeping in mind that we still are going to compare this to the rendered audio as well. Maybe that will show us some more encouraging results, although I literally don't think that's possible based on how the computer would be rendering this MIDI to audio. I literally don't think that's possible. But okay, so let's just take one more sample near the very end, and we'll tighten these up about right there to right there to right there. 6 milliseconds again. Okay, so fairly consistent. We have 7, 4, 6, 5, 6. So what's that? The average is probably around 6, 5, over 5.5 milliseconds. So that's concerning. I feel like so 5.5 milliseconds. That's that's maybe within the realm of acceptable, but I was hoping that there would be some latency compensation or something. Maybe there is, and this kind of like 6 milliseconds is just the best that it can do in terms of its error margin. I don't think there is any compensation in Reaper because we would see if there was compensation, we would probably see some samples, some recorded MIDI that was very, very slightly before the audio, So this could be worse, but it's not great. So let's go ahead and compare the mic feed audio to the rendered audio of the drum MIDI. So, oops, drum bus rendered audio. Yeah. So let's see. I'm guessing. So this is the sample this is the sample we just measured at 6 milliseconds for mic feed versus MIDI. So now we can measure that exact same sample versus the audio. It's like identical. 6 milliseconds. So yeah. Let's take a few more data points just to confirm beyond reasonable doubt. I believe, did we check this very, very first sample? Yeah, the very, very first sample was 7 milliseconds of latency. So let's do this and tighten it up. That's fine. And then over to here. It's a very interesting waveform. Yep, 7 milliseconds. So yeah, so this delay, this latency, has nothing to do with the playback of the MIDI that is triggering samples. Even if we render it, we're seeing the exact same latency. So I'm going to do some more research and see if there's any way to fix this. Maybe write a little script that will allow me to nudge all selected MIDI by, or maybe just, yeah, nudge all selected MIDI by a certain number of milliseconds. But I definitely encourage you to run this kind of test on your own setup and see if the latencies that you're experiencing are similar, are acceptable, are consistent or inconsistent. And I don't know. Maybe I'll be making a switch to an acoustic drum kit.
Okay, and for part two, I'm going to, instead of monitoring my playing of this kit through Superior Drummer, I'm going to disable Superior Drummer while tracking, and instead just monitor the audio from this brain, from the eDrum kit's brain, and see if that improves the latency of the recorded MIDI when we take the Superior Drummer VST out of the loop entirely. Yeah, watch part two if you want to see those results. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more things. Bye.